My fellow Americans, welcome to The Celluloid President, the podcast about American presidents on film. Today we're discussing Killers of the Flower Moon, Martin Scorcese's epic about greed, murder, oil rights, and the plight of the American Indian.
Well, our war hero has arrived. You made a good choice calling back here. Osage are the finest, wealthiest, and most beautiful people on God's earth. They outsmarted everybody. They have the say. Who gets the oil? So, I got a question. You like women? That's my weakness.
I'm Gary Holmes, and joining me today via Zoom from California is Jim Robinson, who loves nothing more than a 3.5 hour movie.
Gary, I have to get over this prejudice because I was checking, and some of my favorite movies, and some of the most popular movies of all time, in fact, are between 3 and 4 hours. Gone with the Wind, Godfather 1, Godfather 2, personal favorites of mine, JFK and Nixon by Oliver Stone, Titanic by James Cameron, Sound of Music, West Side Story, the list goes on. So I got to get over this.
All right. Well, you and I have not talked about this at all. So we will find out whether Killers of the Flower Moon lands in the same category as Godfather 2. We've had a lot of discussion on this podcast, Jim, as you know, about where we go next, because we're beginning to run out of run out of movies about presidents. And for a while, we decided that we're going to try and identify movies that depict a moment in U.S. history and discuss what it says about the American story.
Yeah, and especially when there is some kind of an intersection with politics, with the presidency, with government, and with policy. And I think there is in this film.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is an important period in American history and about an important subject. Having said that, whenever possible, we're going to try and identify movies in which presidents do appear, even if only in bit parts. And there is a president in Killers of the Flower Moon, and it's the bittest of the bit parts. In this movie, a group of Osage Indians go to Washington to plead for help because they're being systematically murdered because of their oil rights. They meet up with President Calvin Coolidge, and in the movie, he utters 3 words: "Yes, thank you."
Well, that's one more than what he usually utters.
Right.
So
You
we're making
lose.
progress.
Yeah, exactly. I want to say, by the way, we're going to talk about Coolidge for a couple minutes here, that I have been to his childhood home in Vermont, Plymouth Notch. I'm sure you've never been there.
No, and I'm mad at you for not taking me because we spent 4 years sweating things out in Vermont. And why didn't we ever do a little field trip and
I
see
know. I
it?
mean, it's probably about an hour away from where we went to college. It's a tiny little village in the middle of nowhere. But there is a presidential library there, which was closed when I was there. I mean, it's right in the middle of the state. It's not on the way to anything. I had to go by myself on one of these trips up to Vermont when I was not with my wife, because she was not going to go out of the way to go to Calvin Coolidge house. And the house is right across the street, and it's boarded up too. I don't even know if the house is open, but anyway. So now I've been to Calvin Coolidge house and to the outside the Calvin Coolidge house, and also the Martin Van Buren house. So if I could only find Chester Alan Arthur's house, I think I'd get the trifecta. All right. So what do we think about? Go ahead.
Yeah. What do we think about Calvin Coolidge? In recent years, he's developed sort of a bunch of groupies among conservatives. And, books have been written and homage has been paid. I think anytime any president cuts the tax rate, he attracts some conservatives. I'm not a member of the Coolidge fan club. I have nothing against him. I should like him because I grew up on Coolidge Avenue in my
Right.
hometown. The street was named after him. But I think he was a pretty decent, honest guy. If you look into some of the history beyond the cutting of tax rates, he was relatively enlightened on civil rights issues and on women's rights issues. And so I think there's something to be said for him. And in fact, he is the guy that took action in this movie to precipitate the unraveling of the awful crime syndicate that was perpetrating all these murders against the Osage Indians.
Right.
What do you think about him?
Well, I think I probably am a little bit more in the Coolidge fan club than you are. He's a classic small government conservative, low taxes, low spending, presided over a period of economic growth. During that period in the 20s, there was a big cultural explosion in the arts. I mean, it was really one of the great periods of American history when he and Warren Harding were president. Warren Harding, I think, is someone else who's unfairly maligned by left-wing snots like H.L. Mencken because he wasn't an intellectual and he was extremely middle class. And Coolidge was too. He was a Yankee, so of course a New England Yankee, not a New York Yankee. And I appreciate that, having being one too. So I like him. You're right about he was advanced for in the area of civil rights, especially after that racist Woodrow Wilson was president. I think he's okay, and he's actually is a friend of the Indians.
One thing you really have to say about Calvin Coolidge is he has to go down in history as one of the luckiest politicians of all time, because he left office 7 months before the Great Depression began.
Right.
And if he had said, I choose to run
right
in 28 instead of I choose not to run, all of what later became known as the Hoovervilles, the homeless tenement camps around the country, thanks to the Depression, would have been known as Coolidgevilles. So politicians, one thing, and Ronald Reagan always thought this, and you have to have a good sense of timing. You have to know when to come and know when to go.
Now, of
And
course,
he decided to go.
you're assuming that Calvin Coolidge would have responded to the crash of 28 the same way that Hoover did.
I am assuming that.
And Hoover is, was a kind of a big government, moderate Republican, not like Coolidge, who was small government. So he might not have been so bad if Coolidge was president.
Well, the other thing, if we're dealing with what ifs, he would have died a few days before his term ended, or a few weeks.
Right.
So we would have actually had whatever no-name vice president he would have picked, maybe Ben Hoover, and so he would have run against FDR, and he wouldn't have survived his transition, which in those days lasted until March.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want to say one more thing about Coolidge and the Indians. He claimed he was descended from Native Americans on his father's side, and he was really engaged in Indian affairs, and he promoted these interactions with the media. I mean, this picture that we all know of him wearing the Indian headdress is obviously a PR stunt, and Indians went to the White House numerous times, and he even visited Indian reservation in South Dakota, and he signed and supported the 1924 Indian Citizenship Act. So,
right.
He was basically as far as you can go in those days, a friend to the Indians. All right. Well, let's talk about the movie. You did the summary, I assume.
I sure did. And before I give my short summary, I want to make a warning to folks. Just for fun, I decided for the very first time to use ChatGPT.
Okay.
To give me a summary. It's the first time I've ever used it for anything. And this brilliant, articulate, artificial intelligence proceeded right off the bat to tell me that Leonardo DiCaprio starred as the federal investigator Tom White in the movie and cracked the case, which of course is totally wrong, totally grievously in error. So just a word of warning to people, especially to you students out there who are going to try to do your book reports or whatever using ChatGPT. Be careful.
Yeah, we have so many high school students listening to this podcast.
That's right. So instead, listen to true, genuine intelligence, which is me. So here we go. Killers of the Flower Moon is based on actual events and real people. It's drawn from a book by journalist David Gran. It delves into the intricate web of corruption and conspiracy surrounding the murders of the Osage Nation members of that tribe in the 1920s in Oklahoma. The tribe had become incredibly wealthy due to oil discoveries on their land with rights that would be passed on between generations. So they were targeted for their wealth and their rights by the evil major domo of the community, King Hale, played by Robert De Niro. And all of the capo regimes and minions he was able to corrupt into his schemes. This includes his nephew, Ernest Burkhart, played by DiCaprio. Ernest marries Molly, played by Lily Gladstone, who is an Osage, and then participates in all the schemes to murder members of his own wife's family and others, all to winnow out relatives who would inherit the oil rights and gain the oil rights for themselves. After a grisly and depressing series of gruesome crimes and murders, Molly, suffering through tragedies and illness, travels to Washington and is able to make a personal appeal to President Coolidge to get the feds involved, since all the locals are just so corrupt. Federal investigators arrive and start to uncover and unravel the whole scheme. Ernest ends up turning state's evidence and brings down his uncle by testifying against him. This has been called a Western, and rightly so. But Gary, this is not your father's Western or your grandfather's Western either. Where have you gone, John Wayne?
Well, this is after World War II, right? Or after World War One. So
Right.
it's definitely a different period in Western history. All right. So this movie ranked number 36 in box office grosses last year with $68 million and $157 million in grosses worldwide. The budget was $200 million. So it was a big loser in the theaters. Supposedly, some of those losses were made up on video on demand rentals. And of course, it was financed by Apple Plus and is on the Apple service. So what do they care if they lose $100 million on a movie?
So it's impossible to know, right? Because when you have a subscription service, who knows where the tipping point is in terms of subscribers feeling there's enough content.
Well, exactly. I mean, exactly right. Netflix, Max, Hulu, Amazon, Apple, all these companies, they want you to subscribe. So it doesn't really matter how many people watch it as long as people keep subscribing.
Does it contribute to part of the critical mass
right
that attracts and keeps subscribers? And I've got to say, if we're looking at ticket sales in theaters versus Apple or whatever, I think for me personally, this would be a perfectly horrible movie to go see in the theater. Which is not to say it's a horrible movie. I'm just saying I cannot imagine sitting through 3.5 hours of depression and sordid stuff in an actual movie theater with no intermission.
All right. Well, I sat through it. This is one of my running themes is that a lot of these movies are a lot better on the theater on the screen than they are on TV. I wasn't bored, I will say that, watching the movie. I'll also say this movie was well received by the critics, and it did well during a awards season. It received 10 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Supporting Actor. 0 wins, however. Was also nominated for 7 Golden Globe Awards, including Best Picture, Drama, and Lily Gladstone did win Best Actress for Golden Globe. So it was, it's definitely well respected and well received by the critics, and so who would you recommend this movie to?
History buffs.
Yeah.
And also those who believe that adequate attention should be paid to darker chapters in American history, those who like true crime stories, a web of crime and corruption that is eventually unraveled. I think people who like that kind of narrative, and those who enjoy delving into some of the Native American cultures in our country, because you get some good doses of that, and those who like Westerns, maybe. How
Yeah,
about you?
I would also, I mean, I agree on all that, and I would add Martin Scorcese fans, of whom there are many, and pe people that want to see all his movies. We'll be talking later about why, how it fits into his overall oeuvre. The biggest audience, so the most important audience of all, is people with big bladders, because that was a struggle. I'll have to say, 3.5 hours sitting in that seat, not possible.
I read that in Europe, in some of the theaters, they inserted a intermission,
Yeah. Okay.
and the filmmakers and the distributors got all over their case
Yeah.
for doing that. They thought it was a violation of their artistic choices they had been making. Unlike, say, a movie like Sound of Music and Gone with the Wind that have
Those have
intermissions.
intermissions in them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's kind of oppressive to do that.
So what did you like about the movie?
Well, I liked quite a number of things about it. I liked the fact that it could graphically and unapologetically portray a very dark chapter in American history without getting too preachy about it,
Yeah.
and without using too broad a brush to say that this shows that the entire country is evil and rotten. I think it was constrained in that sense. It was really more a movie about evil than it was a movie about race. And so I think I like that about it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I also I liked how it was constructed in a way. It's very interesting. It was, we see this movie from the killer's perspective rather than the book was written as a whodunit. You don't know from the beginning who killed people, but we see the plot being unraveled right in front of us. So when that happens, you kind of identify with the person who is doing the killing, and then so it makes us all kind of morally complicit, because you can't help but feeling identifying with the Leo DiCaprio character, even though we know he's a bad guy. So it's an interesting way. It's just an interesting choice to see it from the killer's perspective rather than from the victim's perspective.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that was noteworthy about this film, as we're sort of looking at what are the moral equations here, the Osage Indians really don't come off that well either.
Right.
I mean, first of all, they were just as susceptible to American materialism, the common knocks on the Roaring Twenties, ostentatious shows of wealth, all into their fancy cars and furs and clothes, the drinking, the infidelities, all that kind of stuff. Um, and the filmmakers did not sort of buy into sort of this noble savage crap. So
Right.
it wasn't evil white men and the noble savages. That was not the equation here. And I appreciated that about this movie. And then I would finally, on the liking stuff, I would say some of the scenes were beautifully shot, especially the aerial scenes of, like some of the, as they were performing their ancient dances and rituals and things like that. My bottom line is this is a kind of a movie where conservatives have to put up or shut up. When some of the red states are signing these laws, banning critical race theory and all of the signatories, the governors like DeSantis, were telling us this does not mean that we want airbrushed American history. This does not mean that the bad along with the good that happened in our past shouldn't be shown. Well, this is a put up or shut up movie. If you're going to try to say this movie is anti-American because it showed this very horrible series of events done against this tribe, well, then I'm not going to believe you about your stuff about, we don't want whitewashed history.
Yeah, and I have to say that I don't remember there being a lot of criticism about this movie from an anti-American perspective, although I was nervous about it because anytime you have, a victimized group being portrayed, being victimized, there's a danger of that.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
it's
don't
because
either.
now,
It's a
yeah, no, I
forewarning
know,
on
I
my
know,
part.
I,
Yeah.
I know, I know what you mean because I went into it with this thinking the same thing, like, oh, here we go again. I'll tell you some other things that I liked. You talked about the direction, the cinematography. I mean, that is gorgeous in this movie. He is a master of the camera movement and where to put the camera and what to shoot. So there's big epic. It is a Western. The only reason it's a Western really is because it shows the vast expanses of the country out there in Oklahoma and makes it look so beautiful. And I also thought the acting was very good and everything really connected with all those filmic trades. The writing was good. And then finally the score, Robbie Robinson, who
Robertson, yeah.
uh, Robinson,
Robertson, yeah.
not right, not Robinson, which is what you are. They became friends when he did the documentary about the Last Waltz, which is when the band broke up, and the group called the band broke up in 1978, and he filmed the last concert. And like Robbie Robertson has been his go-to composer ever since then, and so he composed the music in this movie, and he since died before it came out.
Yeah, the music grew on me at first. In some of the opening scenes, I thought it sounded off key a little bit, too modernistic for what was on the screen.
Yeah.
But after a while, I got into it more.
All right. What did you not like?
Well, I don't think Scorsese's really that good a storyteller. He's not tight in his presentations of narrative. He's he's no Spielberg, that's for sure.
Right.
Remember when you and I were talking about Amistad and how Spielberg seemed to know just how much of that horrific Atlantic crossing to
Yeah.
put in his movie,
Yeah.
knew he had to put it in, but knew exactly when to stop it so that it wasn't overkill. I think, to use a bad pun, there was a lot of overkill in this movie. It just, we didn't, we saw murder after murder after murder and plot after plot after murder plot. And it just went on and on and on. And even at the very end, after, thankfully for me, it was transitioning into a trial, which I like. I like trial and
Right.
lawyer movies. There we go again. We had to flash back and see reenactments of more of the murders that happened 3 hours earlier. I just don't think he's a very good storyteller. He doesn't weave his narratives together that well. And, you remember the George Harrison movie that he did, Living in the Material World,
Right.
which was also 3.5 hours long. I didn't notice the 3.5 hours because I liked George so much that I was going to accept anything put up on the screen. But even there was nothing linear about that biopic. He was all over the place, for God's sakes. So that was my main complaint.
All right.
I'm going to
Well,
vent because that also means it didn't have to be 3.5 hours.
yeah. Well, my complaint is really about the length. I mean, our complaint is not quite as articulately stated as yours, but I mean, it just didn't need to be 3.5 hours. And Apple obviously just gave him a blank check and said, "Do whatever you want. You're a genius. If you want to make it 3.5 hours, if you want to fool around with the story, go ahead and do it." And when a movie is not disciplined by market forces like this one isn't, it just gets a little flabby and over the top, and it didn't need to be this long. Another thing I didn't really like about it was it seemed a little cynical. Now, I agree with you that it didn't portray all the white people, all of the Americans, all the white people as bad guys, and all the good people, all the red people as good guys. But you know, in this community, though, every white member seemed to be scheming to fleece them. And maybe that's the case, but I find it hard to believe that no white person ever shows any remorse for the killings. I can accept that there was evil there, but the idea that no one stood up for the Indians except for the FBI is a little hard to believe.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if they're going to make that case of how the discovery of oil affected the Osage Indians and corrupted those seeking to steal it, I wanted to see more about the oil business.
Mm.
I wanted to see more of the follow the money stuff. You know, you had all these people taking advantage of the Indian oil wealth, but like, where did that wealth go? They still all lived in crappy houses. King Hale, the De Niro character, you know, what was so important about gaining those rights? What what was he spending it on, is what I'm saying. And I just
Well,
didn't give
yeah.
me more economics. Give me more economics. That would have made it really interesting. You know, Oliver Stone would have done that.
Well, the question of what he's going to spend the money on is part of where the evil lies. He just wants more and more and more, even though he doesn't really need it. I mean,
Right.
and I'll say one other thing that I didn't like about the movie, and this is really my major complaint, is the ages of the characters were all off. Ernest, the Leonardo DiCaprio character, is really only about 25 years old, but he's played by DiCaprio, who's 49. And
Yeah.
the same with King Hale, played by Robert De Niro. De Niro's like 80 something years old. What is it? Now we get, it's like, what do you care about you need all this money for when you're 80 years old? I mean, and the real King Hale was probably in his 50s. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was unbelievable to me. And I'll tell you that when it really became unbelievable is when the FBI agent came in. He's played by Jesse Plemons, who's 35. He was calling Ernest son, you know? He's like, well, this is so, 35-year-old is calling someone who's 49-year-old son, like, I know this is rough for you, son, but you're going to have to go through it or something like that.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is that I was so glad when we got to the last 45 minutes because there really wasn't much dramatic tension
Yeah.
in the first 2.5 hours of the movie. It was almost this grinding down of this horrible set of schemes and circumstances with not a lot of dramatic tension. And then at the end, there was some kind of payoff. And is is King Hale going to be brought down or not? And how's that going to happen? But you had to go through a lot to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'd say the last thing is I thought the motives of the lead character, the Leo character,
Yeah.
Ernest, were so unclear. We didn't really know, was he mentally retarded or disabled? Was he an idiot? Or was he really very clever and scheming? And why was he doing all that? What tipped him into this corruption? That never really was brought out.
All right, I'm going to talk when we get to talking about Leo himself.
Yeah.
I'll give you my thoughts on that. What do you think the movie's trying to accomplish?
Well, I think from a Hollywood perspective, there's been a lot of movies. There was sort of an evening out of the playing field. There's been a lot of movies about the plights of African Americans, about the plights of Jews, about the plights of gays. And I think now a movie about a very dark chapter of what was inflicted upon Native Americans, and one that was not that well known. was in for some treatment. And I think that was one of the purposes, to
Yeah.
show that, a chapter that needed to be better known in history.
So I thought the movie, I don't know how many Martin Scorsese movies you've seen, but he's had this career-long interrogation of evil. From his very first commercial movies, Mean Streets in 1973, he's been preoccupied with the issue of why people do bad things to each other. And his milieu is typically other Italian. He's Italian American, and it's usually been other Italian Americans in the mob, especially. I mean, if you look at Goodfellas, Casino, The Departed, The Irishman, they're all other Italians, and they're all mobsters who are, you know, doing evil. And I think this is a continuation of that, except that it's been transposed to the Western scene. So,
Yeah.
which makes it brings a little freshness to it. The Irishman, which he previously did for Apple like 3 years ago, was also 3.5 hours. It's even longer than this. And it's a little bit tiring after a while to write do these movies about gangsters. So he's moved it to a different area, and I think that's what he's trying to do. He's even at 80 years old or however old he is experimenting with new genres and even now a historical epic here. So
That's interesting. It in some ways it really is a gangster movie, though,
yeah,
an organized crime movie.
right.
And I think what you said about evil, the role of evil and why people do bad things, is interesting, because what we see in this movie is solutions that don't work. So
Right.
when the tribe gets money, that doesn't solve their problems when they get wealth and riches. And I don't know if this was intentional or not, but the movie also kind of shows that integration doesn't work, because this is a very integrated group of people. The whites and the Osage Indians have much more integration in terms of their lives and their marriages and their economy and their community than many of the other people nowadays that just, give lectures about integration. These people really did integration, and it didn't work.
Well, yes, that's right. Although, if the reason that you're integrating, the reason that the whites are integrating with the Indians is because they can steal their money, well, it's not going to work.
Yeah, but I
So,
think there was integration beyond that.
yeah, no, I know.
And but I think that was one of the pernicious messages of this movie, was that finding newfound wealth does not solve Native Americans' problems, and integration isn't necessarily the answer. And by the way, neither is federalism, the belief in local government.
Exactly right. I mean, in this case, the heroes are the FBI, the federal government,
Right.
and you're right. It does cause people like us who usually believe in federalism and solving the problems at the lowest level or the smallest level of government. A lot of times your local sheriffs are going to be corrupted, and even your state government's going to be corrupted. So sometimes as much as I hate to admit it, you're going to need the FBI or someone bigger to come in and solve problems.
Right, right. I think that's one of the takeaways from this movie.
Yeah.
And we can give ourselves some solace in the idea that, well, this was the 20s. And, there really wasn't, maybe there needed to be a better balance between federal and local governments. But of course, all these issues are still with us today.
Yeah. So before we leave this, I just want to mention that I feel like American Indians are having a moment in pop culture right now. There's this movie, and also the best show on TV, as far as I'm concerned, is called Reservation Dogs. It's about a group of American teenagers living on an Oklahoma reservation, and it's funny, it's heartwarming, it's moving, and it's not the least bit woke. And Lily Gladstone is in that movie as well. She
Hmm.
plays one of the aunts of the And it's great. I would recommend to anyone who's interested in contemporary Indian issues to give that show a watch. So,
Well, yeah, that's you could also maybe say that the Native Americans are having their moment in the sun economically too. Now, there's still high rates of poverty and there's still a lot of social ills that afflict some of the tribes, but they've discovered a few pretty good cash cows that have enriched many members of the Native American community. For one thing, casinos.
yeah,
We've got 518 Indian casinos all around the country with $41 billion in revenues. An operation, by the way, which you could argue inflicts social ills
right,
on white people and on anyone who goes in and can't control themselves in those casinos.
right, right,
You've got Indians, a lot of the useless land that they were given now turns out to be lands that have a lot of water
right,
in them in the Southwest. So suddenly they're sitting atop of very, very wealthy water rights and land rights. Some of the quote unquote useless lands are generate a lot of wealth and income for Indians. When I was living in Palm Springs, I had to write a check. I owned my house, but I had to write a check every month to the Indian tribe that actually owned the land. And I had like a 99-year lease. And they didn't do a damn thing, but they got money. And all power to them, I have to say. So I think you're right about a moment in the sun, maybe not just pop culture, but in the economy too.
Well, don't forget also that we almost elected an Indian president when Elizabeth Warren was running. All right. So speaking of actors, let's talk about them. Leonardo DiCaprio. This is his seventh movie with Scorsese. Gangs of New York, Departed, Wolf of Wall Street. You recently saw Aviator. He plays an interesting character here. He's not too bright, but he has the ability to well, you know how to pronounce that word?
Compartmentalize.
Yes, exactly. That's the word I was trying to say. You know, on the one hand, I think he's legitimately in love with his wife. On the other hand, he's trying to kill her. So he portrays one kind of evil, like the passive kind. He probably wouldn't think to hurt anyone, but he gets caught up in someone else's web and seems shocked at where it all ends up. So I don't think he's mentally retarded as much as he is morally retarded.
He's hard to figure. I mean, I thought his acting was good,
Yeah, he's
but
quite a good actor, actually.
yeah, and it's really a remarkable story. He began as a sitcom teen idol
Right.
and was able to parlay and think of all the roles he's played.
Oh,
But this is more a complaint about the characterization of the filmmakers that I've already hinted
yeah.
at, which is, you know, we never got to see why he got into these schemes. All of a sudden, he was just involved in one of the beatdowns or one of the thefts. We never really learned about what got him into all this. And I couldn't figure out whether he was just a total idiot or a totally manipulative evil man or mentally challenged. I couldn't figure it all out. We couldn't really tell whether he believed what he was told, that the medicine he was giving his wife would just slow her down, it wouldn't kill her. Or did he know it would kill her? We didn't, that was left on the cutting room floor.
Well, I think that he both knew and didn't know. He kind of, I think he, as I said, it's sort of incremental. The kind of stuff that he was being asked to do is incrementally worse and worse and worse and worse. And when you take one step and then you take another step, and so I don't have a problem with this. In fact, I think it makes it more intriguing as to try and figure out what's going on in his mind, because as I said, he loves her, but he's also trying to kill her. Speaking of which, can
Well,
you?
he's killing, he did kill, participate in the killing of the sisters, which she loved.
Oh, I know.
I mean, I just couldn't feel any sympathy for him whatsoever. When his child died at the end of the movie,
Yeah.
I felt not one bit of sympathy for him.
Okay. So I was going to say, I'm going to give you a little quiz here. Can you think of any other movies about a man slowly trying to kill his wife?
Hmm. I
Hmm.
can, but I can't recall their names.
Well, one of them is famous in our movie-going relationship. That would be Notorious.
Oh, yes. Yes,
You
that's
remember
right.
that one?
Oh, yeah.
There's also the movie Gaslight,
Yep, I've
which is
seen
where the
that.
expression gaslighting comes from. These two movies aren't really killing so much as more like gaslighting, which is what is also going on in this movie. Stepford Wives and Rosemary's Baby, and with which husbands are plotting against their wives and
Yeah,
trying to drive them crazy. So the other thing I'll say about him is he's really showing his age. I mean, he's 49 years old and he looks it.
right.
You know,
Well, I thought one thing I was laughing at is it's well known that Leo, and I think I'm not familiar with Jesse Plemons. They're constantly battling their weight, and they were to be in a movie that gives you license to eat and drink like a pig. I mean, it must have been easy duty.
yeah, I don't think Leo's had any work done, which is, I mean, I respect him for that. I recently saw Ben Affleck on the Tom Brady roast, and I thought he looked terrible. You could tell that he's already had plastic surgery. So I don't think Leo, it's too bad because he used to be a really beautiful young man. Now he's a little thick around the edges, but he's still pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
he's
what
a
he's got is this,
49-year-old
yeah,
guy.
he's got a charisma too.
Yeah.
He's got a screen presence. I
All
mean,
right.
was Humphrey Bogart good looking? No, but he had this incredible screen presence. So,
Right. Right. Robert De Niro. This is their 10th movie together, Marty and Bobby, going back to Mean Streets and Taxi Driver in the 70s. You know, I think we can agree, you and I agree that he's an intellectual moron in real life. But he's quite a good actor, I have to say. I have to give him that.
well, I hate to say it because as I was watching this movie, thinking about he's for those that don't know, he's one of the more idiotic
Yeah.
actor commentators on politics. He's just so over the top and outlandish. He's in the club of Cher and Bette Midler and Rob Reiner on that score.
I
But
will say this though. I remember seeing an interview with Alfred Hitchcock in which he says to be a good actor, you cannot have intelligence because it interferes with your ability to emote and somehow interferes with their ability. And I remember this is an interview with David DeCavett. And DeCavett started naming off a lot of really smart actors, and he says Hitchcock said, "Yeah, but they're not great actors."
that's
So,
interesting.
all right,
So on to the acting. I thought De Niro was fantastic in this film. I thought he was super, as much as I hate to say it. And he portrayed evil so beautifully, if that's not a contradiction. I don't know why, maybe you do, that he didn't qualify for the Best Actor category in the Oscars. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. He was the lead actor in this movie. I don't care what the minutes of screen time would show. He was the centerpiece, and he was just fantastic.
well, he plays an entirely different kind of evil than Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah,
DiCaprio is obviously playing dumb evil, and De Niro's playing smart evil. I
he's
mean,
the devil.
he's the
He's the
devil.
devil.
He's
He's
totally the devil.
orchestrating everyone else's evil. He's the evil parrot on everyone's shoulder
Right.
throughout this movie. And you know what else I couldn't get away from when I first saw him? This is the guy that should play LBJ in a real good LBJ biopic. He kept
Yeah.
reminding me, and I'm not trying to say LBJ was anything like the evil in this movie, but he reminded me so much of LBJ so many times with his different persuasive speeches and where he's going up and putting his arm
Yeah.
around the characters and doing the full LBJ treatment. God, it was so uncanny.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he's but and the other interesting thing about him is that he's the kind of evil where it slowly compounds on itself until he just becomes sloppy and careless, and he's undone because he's not as careless as in the with his murders as he was in the beginning.
I
Um,
thought he was great. He should have. I got to tell you, I think this performance was better than the Oppenheimer performance, and he should have won the. He should have been nominated for Best Actor, and he should have won for Best Actor.
well, there's a lot of calculation that goes into who's going to be nominated for what, and you usually put yourself in the category you think you have the best chance of winning. And I'm sure they didn't want to put Leo and De Niro in the same category, and and that's and that's why he ended
Yeah,
up in being nominated for uh, as a supporting.
it was
Uh,
certainly more of a heavy lifting and accomplished role than Robert Downey Jr., who won the Oscar in that category.
yeah,
Although I understand the dynamics behind finally giving him one.
yeah,
But if just think of those two roles, which was more deserving?
yeah, yeah. Also in this movie, he also becomes a little bit of a psychopath, right?
Yes, absolutely.
He becomes so arrogant that he thinks just because he says something, it's true. And he thinks he can get out of his problems by writing letters and making public statements about how much he loves the Indians and how much they love him. So,
Yeah, he loses all self-awareness
yeah.
as the movie goes on.
All right, let's talk about Lily Gladstone. Brand new to a lot of us. I mean, I did see her, as I said, in Reservation Dogs, and she won the Academy Award. No, she did not win, famously did not win the Academy Award for this because it went to Emma Stone in Poor Things. Two very different styles of movie acting. This is a much more nuanced and intuitive way of acting, where Emma Stone in Poor Things was really acting all over the place. So, what did you
Yeah,
think about her?
I didn't see Poor Thing, so I can't compare. But I wasn't hugely impressed by her in this movie. I was really worried at the beginning during the courtship because I thought she was gonna. I was worried about it from the movie standpoint.
Yeah,
I thought, here we go. We're gonna. This is the wise, all-knowing Native American, you know, putting down in her mind and with her friends this boorish, white guy. And I thought, she had a sphinx-like look on her face and her reactions. And I thought, this is not going to be that appealing to me. But she grew on me as the movie went along. I thought she was good, not great.
okay. Well, her role highlights the bargain, tragic bargain that many men and many women make, where you suspect your spouse is bad for you, but you love them so much that you just go all in faith alone, which is what she did. And apparently, this is a true story that Ernest and Molly really did love each other in real life. And this performance suggests why. She knows he's after her for her money, but she doesn't really care. I mean, she could have married another Indian, but was attracted to the good-looking bad boy. And we've seen
Yeah,
that.
and then some of her reactions toward the end were really astounding.
Yeah,
I mean, she walked out from him at the end
yeah,
because he didn't admit that he was trying to poison her. But before that, she had already learned that he was complicit in the deaths of her sisters and still hugs him. I mean, to me, this is so beyond the pale. I just can't imagine it. But
yeah. I mean, when
it's
you
just,
love someone so much, though, I mean, it's you forgive them, and we see this a lot with women who will not believe their daughters when they tell them that the husband has molested them.
yeah.
And
Yeah. I just couldn't fathom it. But
yeah,
I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I'm just saying when I was looking for the catharsis at the end, I was looking for things like her slapping his face instead of hugging him,
yeah,
those kind of things.
yeah. Let's just talk about Jesse Plemons for a second. He plays the FBI agent who finally solves the case. He's had some of the most iconic TV roles of the past 15 years. He was in Saturday Night Lights, Breaking Bad, and Fargo. And in the movies, he was also in The Master and The Irishman, The Power of the Dog. He's based on a real character, Tom White. He breaks the crime ring and sends De Niro to jail and Leo to jail. So,
Yeah,
um,
I'd never seen him in anything.
okay. So what did you
And
think?
so I have no fine. He didn't make a huge impression on me.
Okay. You know, it's strange to see the FBI as the hero of a movie these days. Their reputation has slipped so much in recent years. First among the left for going after communists, and now among the right. It's hard to remember there was a time when the Bureau was one of the most highly respected organizations in America.
Well, this was kind of a precursor to that because the Bureau had not actually been formed yet. So this was the whatever the Bureau of Investigation or
Right,
whatever they
right, right, right.
and um, and I think that yeah, I mean, again, it gets to the theme of um, when do the feds have to come in and crack down on the locals,
Yeah.
and they definitely needed to in this case. No argument there.
Anyone else you want to talk about acting
Well,
wise?
I think we have to mention that Scorsese is in this movie
Okay.
himself,
Yeah.
acting acting a cameo in the last scene. I know we're going to talk about scenes, but since I just brought that up, let me just ask you, what did you think of that last scene? For those that
So
haven't seen the movie yet, maybe you can explain it.
no, well, what usually happens in a movie is a historical movie in which there's some loose ends that haven't been tied up. Is that there's a title scene that shows,
Slates.
the words on the
Yeah.
screen that says so and so died and so did this and so and we see that all the time. In this movie, what they decided to do instead was to show an enactment of a radio program, which I think probably really happened, where they say what happened, and
And they're
Scorsese narrated.
dramatizing it, and they've
Yeah,
got all this. It was interesting to see how radio created sound effects.
right, right. I I thought I didn't like it. I thought it was a mistake. It's like after 3.5 hours, can we just like see the title card, please? But what did you think?
I was conflicted. At first, I didn't like it. And the more I think about it, the more I think it's pretty clever. It
Mhm.
took care of business, as you pointed out. Um, it also was almost like thumbing the nose at the fans of the book. All right, you folks that wanted a true crime story, here's your true crime story, and reenact it as a radio drama. It did presage the emergence of a very popular
Yeah,
form of pop culture entertainment, which is true crime. It's a
yeah.
huge to this day, and I'm one of the fans. True crime stories acted out in film and in radio and in TV. And ultimately, I think it was fairly clever. And I thought, by the way, Scorsese was good
He was good.
as an
I mean,
actor.
the way he talked at the end about what happens to Molly, heart in his voice. I mean, she actually did die of diabetes at age 50, which is kind of tragic for after everything that happened to her in real life. I just thought, and you're right, it is interesting to see. It's a reminder that the FBI was self-promoting itself from the very beginning.
Right.
This is probably in the 30s when this program came out. And already the FBI was sponsoring its own TV shows and radio shows rather. And then of course they were all in on the FBI TV program that was on when we were growing up.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of ingenious. Whether it fits into this movie, I think is open for some debate.
Yeah, it just didn't
Now,
tonally it didn't hit right with me to show all those special effects and the corniness of the. I was like, oh, I gotta go to the bathroom. Can we just wrap this up?
I gotta
Um,
say, as a postscript, something about one more actor.
okay, who's that?
Barry Corbin, who played the corrupt Undertaker,
Okay.
was Sheriff Fenton Washburn on Dallas.
Okay.
How could I leave that alone?
You couldn't find a James Bond connection?
I'm afraid not.
No Beatles connections here. Well, you mentioned Scorsese, and we might as well talk about him as a director. Um, he's one of the greatest directors, and possibly the greatest living director right now. Never moved to Hollywood, so he was always an industry outsider. And he's never, his movies don't really win a lot of Academy Awards as a result. I mean, he doesn't hobnob in Hollywood. His early movies have tremendous energy and deal with disturbing subjects. Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, New York, New York, The King of Comedy, a lot of violence, innovative use of camera, and popular music is one of the, he was one of the early directors who would insert popular songs into the
Yeah.
movies to really highlight what was going on. But he also made different kind of movies like Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, groundbreaking feminist movie, After Hours, about the craziness of downtown New York, The Last Temptation of Christ, and Kudrin, about Jesus and the Dalai Lama. So I have to say, I like and admire almost all his movies, but I have to admit that none of them are actually in my top 20 over the past 50 years. I mean, Goodfellas maybe the closest.
He's not my favorite. And
Okay.
I don't think about, I'm not as focused on the directors and their oeuvres in movies as you are, maybe. I'd take Oliver Stone and Spielberg over him.
Yeah.
I think I have to admit I haven't seen some of his most famous movies. Never seen Raging Bull or Taxi Driver. I obviously know some of the history about Taxi Driver and the famous snippets of scenes and things like that. I just don't think he's ultimately as good a storyteller as some of our better directors, nor is he as good at creating suspense and tension as, say, a director like Hitchcock. So, not my favorite, not my
Okay.
favorite, but he certainly deserves all the accolades he gets in terms of his role in filmic history.
All right, let's turn to the history. This movie's based on a very respected book, as you mentioned, by David Gran. I assume the book itself is a reasonably accurate depiction of the history. So the question here is, how the movie departs from the book. I assume you didn't read the book, right?
Now, I haven't read the book, but I read that it was focused more on the role of the FBI, precursor to the FBI, and the who done it and the how did you find out who done it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the actual title of the book, which is Killers of the Flower Moon, An American Crime and the Birth of the FBI, I mean, that shows you where the focus of the book is. And I actually took it out of the library and leafed through it just to see what it was like. And the stories of the murders and the FBI and the role of the FBI and the formation of the FBI, or the FI, I guess, or the BI,
Yeah,
guess it's called then, is parallel. You mean one chapter on this, one chapter
I
on,
see. Yeah,
and it isn't until you're about two-thirds of the way through that you find out who actually did it. And it does actually focus on the two characters, Molly and Ernest. The author apparently, when he was talking to the grandchildren, the grandchildren claimed absolutely that these two were in love with each other, and he couldn't understand the weirdness of a husband trying to murder his wife.
as I understand it, probably the biggest problematic thing when it comes to history is that she never went to Washington and never met Coolidge.
Yeah.
So that there was a delegation that went to Washington and got to see Coolidge, and to trigger the investigation, she just wasn't part of it. That's a major historical license being taken in this film, but it
Yeah.
doesn't bother me.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't bother me too much either because someone did go. What we don't see here is how it is that the FBI got interested. We're left to believe that Molly goes and talks to Coolidge, and the next thing you know, the FBI shows up.
Right.
And it's probably, and I didn't actually read that part, so I don't know how the FBI heard about it. But, I think it was probably J. Edgar Hoover himself who heard about this. And I mean, this is their first big crime that they solved, and he was all over it from a PR perspective. And it does go to show you one of the tragic things about the Indians is that the federal government was not always in the favor, on the side of the Indians, but the federal government tried to protect the Indians more than the ordinary citizens, and they just couldn't because people, when there's money to be made, people are going to swarm all over it. And they tried to uphold the deal like in the Black Hills, found gold there, and prospectors ran in and they swarmed over that whole property, and the government just couldn't keep them out because there were so many of them.
Yeah, I think in general, terrible things were done to Native Americans, but there was a modicum of sincerity on the part of many people to try to figure out how to deal with this incredible situation. And the some of the tribes themselves were not so cooperative, because they felt that some of the solutions being presented to them, like integration into mainstream society, were wrong. And so it was a very complex set of questions. Do you have reservations or do you have total integration? Uh, how do Native Americans go to white American schools and try to become part of the mainstream? Or do you make sure they preserve their own culture? I mean, all these questions are difficult.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was all evil that drove the answers on the part of the government or the white majority. I think there were many people honestly trying to find solutions.
I just want to say one other thing about the making of the movie. DiCaprio was originally set to play Tom White, the FBI agent who solved the case, and he went to Scorsese and said, I don't think it's right for us to tell the story from the white perspective only, and I think we should tell it from also from the Indian perspective, how this was affecting them, and he convinced Scorsese to change the movie all around. And of course, once Ernest had the biggest character, he wanted to play Ernest, not instead of Tom White. So this is why we got this real age mix up because he was originally supposed to play Tom White. He would have been age appropriate for that. And Jesse Plemons, if it had been backwards, Jesse Plemons had played the part that he would probably have been cast for, which was Ernest. Everything I think would have made a lot more sense.
Nonetheless, when you look at side by side pictures of the real characters and the
Yeah,
actors, there is kind of an uncanny resemblance on the part of Molly and Ernest, and even the white character, the FBI character, to their real life,
yeah,
to the actors that played them. I think because these real life characters are known to hardly anybody,
yeah.
I don't think it really mattered about the ages and the look and all that.
No, no, except that is he's a much DiCaprio is a much more mature man, and he's making young man mistakes. That's my problem with it.
Yeah, that didn't strike. I didn't think of that. Maybe if I saw the movie again, which I won't, um, it will. That
You'd
would come
expect
through.
someone, and of course, supposedly he's just got out of the army, right? He was in the trenches. What I mean, you don't have 45-year-old men in World War I in the trenches. So
I
although
just didn't think of him as a 45-year-old man because, as you know, people aged faster in those days.
yeah,
So
yeah, maybe you're right. All right, let's talk about our favorite scenes. What do you got?
I love the scene when Hale's ranch was on fire
Yeah, yeah. That's one of my.
and the flames and the demons were dancing around. That's just like, in case you didn't miss the point, audience, this is hell and he is evil. And I just thought it was really effective.
Right.
All the flames and the fire and brimstone.
I liked I like that first scene when Ernest arrives at the train station. We're introduced to the town with a series of long tracking shots, and you see the Indians all dressed up in their finery. You see workers fighting with each other, a lot of commotion, and it reflects the energy and the urgent ambition of everyone in in the town there. So I thought that this opening scene was great.
Yeah, I like the scene. Maybe it was my favorite. Was the one that I think we were all waiting for so long, which is when Ernest finally breaks with his uncle when they're in the prison,
Right.
and Hale is going into another one of his LBJ speeches. I gave them schools, I gave them libraries, they love me, and he said, "No, you don't. It's over." And
Yeah.
that was the cathartic moment that the audience really needed at that point. And I love that scene.
A scene that I really like too was when Molly's mother dies. Um, she's lying there in the bed, and everyone around her is crying. And then you see her emerge from her body, smiling with no pain and happy to
Yeah,
meet her ancestors. I mean, it's a kind of a cliche, but it was very haunting and beautiful.
yeah. I enjoyed a couple of the scenes where De Niro was doing his full manipulative kind of schmoozing speeches, drawing people in, persuading
Yeah,
people, and he just launched into the full arm around the shoulder, soothing words, devilish manipulative words, all that. I just really enjoyed the acting. I enjoyed the writing in those scenes. And I
yeah,
like the Coolidge scene. First of all, it was so needed and refreshing to get the hell out of Oklahoma
yeah.
for a couple of minutes and get somewhere else and standing in Washington. And I like that scene with Coolidge. And Coolidge was cast well. He had the right lips. He had the Calvin Coolidge pursed lips. So I enjoyed
Found
that one.
I did find a sequence of him talking. Boy, did he look like a prune.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna at the end I'm gonna put in a clip of him what he actually sounds like, and he sounds like just what you'd expect. I mean, like a prissy old man. But what about favorite lines? You got one?
Just a couple. I like the one near the beginning where Ernest keeps calling his uncle sir, sir,
Yeah.
sir, sir, and De Niro says, "Now stop calling me sir. Call me uncle or king." I thought that was good.
I like the movie when Ernest is with Molly, and he says, "You call me a coyote?" And she says, "Coyote wants money." And he says, "I want to sleep all day and party at night." And um, and then multiple times Ernest says, "I love money," as when Robert De Niro says, whereas when he tells Robert De Niro, "I do love that money, sir," and "I just love money. It's true. It's true. I damn near love it as much as I love my wife." So, I mean, he's like they're not very subtle about this, right? I mean,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
says this at least five times.
There wasn't much comedy
Yeah,
in this movie at all, but I had one laugh out loud moment, and it's when Hale was being brought into jail, and there were reporters out there, and he turns to the press and he says, "I'm as innocent as a newborn babe." I just thought, after all we had just seen and the gruesome murders and plots, innocent as a newborn babe.
well, I have a extremely dark moment of dark humor. This guy named Kelly Morrison, he's in it, and he goes to a lawyer and he says, my dead wife has two kids and they have my name. If I adopted them and they die, will I inherit their head rights? And the lawyer says, this indicates to me that you were planning on adopting and killing these children. And he says, no, not if it's not legal and I don't get the money.
Yeah.
I mean, oh my God.
I know. I know.
Oh, geez. Got anything else? I'm done.
Nope.
Okay. All right. What do you think the relevance? I was going to say this is where we usually talk about the relevance of comparison to politics and society today. Well, I mean, this is like yesterday, so we're basically, what's the relevance to politics?
Well, I think it raises a few interesting issues we've already touched on. Raises the whole issue of the balance of governments. When do you need a strong federal government to sail in and rescue people from an awful local situation? And now lately we're seeing all sorts of manifestations of local abuses of power, local prosecutions, without mentioning any names. And what levels of government do you trust at which times and on which issues? I
Right.
think it's a huge issue today. I've often thought and said that the most important governmental institution in my mind that we have in this country is not the presidency or any governor or Congress, it's the US Supreme Court. Who's going to be there to protect the rights of some lowly citizen somewhere out in the hinterland? And I think that that's one of the issues. And then I mentioned integration. And what happens when integration isn't enough? And what happens when finding a ticket to great wealth, like the Indians did with oil rights, isn't enough? What happens when that doesn't solve the problems? I think those are a couple of the relevancies.
Yeah. We've kind of talked about this before. Scorsese's not really a political director, so I don't think he set out to make a political statement. But anytime you make a movie in which the white dominant culture preys upon a non-white group, you end up making an inherently political statement. I don't really begrudge Scorsese taking his themes about the evil that resides in the human heart and making his first Western. But it comes in the midst of a great reckoning in which every aspect of American history is re-examined and found wanting. So it is definitely a political movie, even if he doesn't want it to be political. I will say this for him: he's Italian American, and in his first, I mean, he's probably made at least 10 movies in which the villains are also Italian American. So I think he's a straight shooter and can call a spade when he sees it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I,
I think
I
that
yeah,
I think we can also, in terms of the relevance for today, I think we can sit here and watch this movie and plausibly believe that something like this couldn't happen today.
yeah,
Maybe the evil could happen, but the exposure of it would happen much sooner, much faster, and the remedies would be triggered much sooner and much faster. You couldn't keep a secret, I don't think. I'd like to think of what
yeah.
was
No,
going on to this degree.
I think that's right. I mean, to some extent, it does show the kind of progress that's been made. I mean, they make also make a point of showing the Tulsa race riots on a movie screen during the newsreels, and I mean that's another horrible incident that happened in the 1920s. And I don't. I mean, that was 100 years ago. People don't like to say that we've made progress, but I think we've made incredible progress.
I think we even have to say that as much excess as there can be in social media, where any mugging in any city is suddenly a national story, thanks to social media, that despite that excess, it would serve us well because episodes like this, I have to think, would become known or at least alleged much sooner.
All right, one of the questions we always ask is, could this movie be made today?
It
Um,
was.
well, I would actually say, and I know it sounds like a dumb movie, a dumb question because the movie just came out last year, but I think the business of Hollywood has changed in just the last year, where even Apple would think twice about opening the vault and letting even Martin
Mhm.
Scorsese make whatever kind of indulgent movie he wants to make. So thematically, I think it'd be made again, but maybe at 2.5 hours and not 3.5.
Yeah,
Um, and maybe they wouldn't be hiring Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio and paying their gigantic salaries. So I don't know. Only been a year, but there's been a lot of changes in the streaming world since then.
right. Couldn't this, couldn't this and shouldn't this be made as a miniseries,
Yeah.
a streaming miniseries instead of
Right.
a theatrical release?
Right. It would have been,
That's my point.
yeah. The problem is when you make a mini series, you get it's on TV. It's not in the big screen, so you miss all the great grandeur and all of that kind of stuff. So, although
Yeah.
sometimes it works, the TV show Yellowstone is set out in Montana, I guess it is, and I watched the first season and it was beautiful. I have a fairly good sized television. And if you sit up close to the TV, it does seem to overwhelm you. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
all right. If you were a high school
Um,
teacher, would you assign this movie?
no, I think it's too intense, but I would certainly teach the incident if
Yeah,
I was a high school teacher. And I would also point out what opportunities have been since found for the Native American community, water rights, land rights, casinos, um, and try to show that the lesson is not only the horror of what happened, but our capacity to improve. Look, my bottom line is I'm glad this movie was made. I'm glad I watched it. But it's like one of those cultural artifacts that you experience but don't necessarily enjoy.
yeah.
Like, who wants to sit around and read Ulysses, or read Ezra Pound's cantos, but you're still glad they're there and glad some people are partaking in them and interpreting them for you. So that's how I look at this.
I probably enjoyed it more than you, dude. Just letting it sitting there in the theater and letting it wash over me was a great experience. But which leads us to our grades. What grade do you give this movie?
I give it a B. Again,
Okay.
I think it's not a theater movie, but it was more than competent. And it was neat story, needed to be told. And that's sort of where I come down.
All right. I give it an A-. So
Really? That
yeah,
high?
I liked it. I think it's a masterpiece actually. And you're right. It was long, but I found it fascinating and beautiful and thought-provoking. So I didn't give it an A+, but anyway. Well, that's the end of our discussion here. The podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and most podcast platforms. I would encourage everyone to subscribe there. We have something that is completely different next time. A movie called Unfrosted, the Jerry Seinfeld story about the invention of Pop Tarts, which has a surprisingly lot to say about politics. So, right, Jim, you've seen it.
Yes, I have, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again.
I know. I got to
And
watch it again with my notebook out and taking down all my notes on
yeah,
what brilliant insights we have.
well,
So,
let me just say, Gary, I think we found the sweet spot in this podcast today. We spoke a few more words than Calvin Coolidge does or did, and yet we were not quite as long as Martin Scorsese's film.
okay. Yes, very good. So we'll say goodbye. We'll see you next time with Unfrosted. And hang in there and listen to a couple words from Calvin Coolidge himself. Bye bye.
Country needs every ounce of its energy to restore itself. The costs of government are all assessed upon the people. This means that the farmer is doomed to provide a certain amount of money out of the sale of his produce, no matter how low the price, to pay his taxes. The manufacturer, the professional man, the clerk must do the same from their income. The wage earner, often at a higher rate when compared with his earning, makes his contribution, perhaps not directly, but indirectly, in the advanced cost of everything he buys. The expenses of the government reach everybody. Taxes take from everyone a part of his earnings and force everyone to work for a certain part of his time for the government.